Hello, everybody, and welcome to episode 339 of the Freelancer Show. Today on our panel, we have Erik Dietrich.
Hi, everybody.
And I'm Jeremy Green. And today we're going to talk a little bit about the dark side of freelancing. And by that, we mean some of the common pain points that people run into, but that, often aren't kind of the big headlines about that people are thinking of when they get into freelancing.
This episode is sponsored by Sentry.io. Recently, I came across a great tool for tracking and monitoring problems in my apps. Then I asked them if they wanted to sponsor the show and allow me to share my experience with you. Sentry provides a terrific interface for keeping track of what's going on with my app. It also tracks releases so I can tell if what I deployed makes things better or worse. They give full stack traces and as much information as possible about the situation when the error occurred to help you track down the errors. Plus, one thing I love, you can customize the context provided by Sentry. So, if you're looking for specific information about the request, you can provide it. It automatically scrubs passwords and secure information, and you can customize the scrubbing as well. Finally, it has a user feedback system built in that you can use to get information from your users. Oh, and I also love that they support open source to the point where they actually open sourced Sentry if you want to self-host it. Use the code devchat at Sentry.io to get 2 months free on Sentry's small plan. That's code devchat at Sentry.io.
Erik, you got an example or two that you want to point out?
Sure. I could probably go on quite at length because it has its own unique set of pain points. But I think it's worth mentioning, at the outset, that it's important to cover these things because I think a lot of people, I think in the book, The E-Myth Revisited, he talks about that, a lot of people confuse being an entrepreneur with having, I think he calls it an entrepreneurial spasm, where you're at work, you decide, that your boss is an idiot and you hate the company and you could go off on your own and you could do this way better than they ever could. And so I think that sort of catapults a lot of people out into the freelance and or entrepreneurial world. It's important to bear in mind that there are these pain points, but I want to say that on balance, I think both of us clearly, since this is our life, think that the benefits offset the pain points, but there are things you might not think of, especially when you have these glamorous images of working from home, earning higher rates, controlling your own destiny, etc. So I'm trying to think of where I would even begin, from the existential to the logistical. Maybe I'll just cover a couple of the ones, if you quit your job today and went and started to apply for freelancing gigs in some capacity or another, the first one I'd go with is pipeline management. So all of your career, if you were a salaried employee or, if you're just getting started out of college or something, anything you had done up to this point was probably applying for a job. And then once you got it, you're done until you get tired of that job. Not so as a freelancer. You have to worry about where your next work is coming from. Even if you do the kind of thing where you sign on as a staff aug, indefinitely, there's a reason companies staff in that fashion, and it's to make you expendable. So you are by definition, no matter what, going to have to worry about where your next work is coming from. So that's probably the first thing right out of the gate. And it's... if you're not used to doing that, it creates a little bit of a mindset shift where I think, rightly or wrongly, when you're employed, you have a tendency to view that as a very stable relationship. And so it's a little bit different to always kind of have in the back of your mind, all right, this seems to be going all right, but what am I going to do next?
Yeah, that's definitely a mindset shift that is very different from being a full-time employee. And I think that pipeline management leads into another thing that people often face that isn't really very apparent, and that is dealing with rejection. Just by virtue of the fact that you kind of need to always be looking for new work and have leads working, at various stages of your pipeline, you will inevitably deal with people saying, nope, your thing is not for me, or I can't afford you, or whatever it is. And it's real easy to allow your ego to kind of get wrapped up in that process of winning work. And if that happens, it's then easy for rejection to feel very personal. And, to really kind of feel like it's, on the same level as somebody broke up with you, or, a friend told you they didn't want to hang out with you anymore or something like that. And at least for me anyway, it was very easy to take those sorts of things personally. And I have had to, be very purposeful and deliberate about realizing that, no, this is work stuff. This is not personal. There's 100 different reasons that this client might not have wanted to hire me right now. And, it's just better for my mental health if I always assume, hey, it's not me, it's them. I know that I do good work. I know that I can deliver good work. And, if somebody's not going to hire me, it's probably not because they think that I do crappy work. It's because things didn't work out, or, I need to charge them more than the job is worth for them to have it done, or, anything. And any of those reasons are not direct reflections on me, either as a person or on the work that I do.
That's, I think of like, you could superficially, if you're listening, compare if you've been in a job search and you've been rejected from that, you might say like, well, that's probably the same thing. But I'd say it's not in two ways. If you're used to conducting job searches, generally you get rejected more than you get accepted as a job search. But number one, the world kind of runs on job searches. And so there is prevailing wisdom that you just got to stick it out with the job search. So there's like a bottom, sooner or later, one of those no's is going to be a yes. This really isn't true in your mindset when you're freelancing, because maybe you're rolling out a new offering or a new line of business, or you've never done it before, but you can get a bunch of rejections and just assume that like, this is never going to work. I'm going to have to go find a job somewhere, or, what have you. And the other thing is that like, even though you'll hear a lot of stories of employers kind of, blowing people off in the job search pipeline, mostly they try to get back to you and offer some sort of, thanks, but no thanks, or you were great, but blah, blah, blah. When you're a freelancer, you move from being an employee or a prospective employee to a vendor. And I mean, this could be its whole own other pay point. But the way companies behave towards vendors is a lot less human in many cases than towards prospective employees. You are there as a vendor to be there if they want you and not if they don't. So you can send out all sorts of communications and just get a complete stonewalling, and you're rolling out this new offering, this new line of business, and you just hear back from nobody. Nobody wants it. Like, that can be, I think, discouraging in a way that maybe people haven't experienced before. I guess on the flip side, until you get that big win, and then there's perhaps no greater feeling in the world.
Yep. Yeah. And, at that point where you get the big win, it's kind of similarly important to keep in mind that, that's not necessarily a reflection of you as a person as well. And that, if you're going to not take rejections as personal, you kind of need to also not take wins as personal to maintain balance there.
Yeah, that's a great point. I mean, you kind of like, with enough of it, it's hard out of the gate if you don't have a lot of experience managing a pipeline and pitching projects, but it becomes a numbers game on a long enough timeline. Yep. So you get to the point where you say, look, my rate of turning the cold outreach that I do into a warm sales conversation is about 1 in 10. And then my rate of closing from a warm sales conversation is like 1 in 4. So my total close rate is 1 in 40, which means I just need to go about the workman-like business of lining up 40 pieces of cold outreach. So you can get past this sort of pain as you get more practiced with it, and it becomes a process. And then it's easier to get, I would say, dispassionate, where you just look at those rejections as almost like milestones on the path to getting an acceptance.
Yeah. Yeah.
So I'll toss out a pain that I imagine a lot of freelancers or solo consultants might experience. It is my personality is such that this hasn't historically been a pain for me, but I've heard this from other people, which is that certain flavors of freelancing can be pretty lonely.
Yep.
meaning that you're, in a lot of work contexts, whether you're an entrepreneur with a startup, whether you're an employee, however you're working, you typically kind of form and have a team and a bunch of coworkers and stuff. But if you're a freelancer kind of going from gig to gig or project to project, especially if you do a lot of work out of your home, it's kind of just you, and you will form professional associations, but not friends, at least not easily in terms of coworkers. So you're not going out to beers with the crew on Friday night or whatever, because you're not really on site, or you're not there for very long.
Yep.
Have you experienced that personally? Like, I'm kind of introverted by nature and sort of a lone wolf worker. So every now and then I kind of think like, I wish as we traveled, if my wife were out doing something, I wish I had some friends around or whatever, but it's not really a pain for me. What's your experience been with this?
Yeah, I'm sort of the same. I'm fairly introverted. I definitely have some very strong hermit tendencies. The not leaving the house for the weekend is, sometimes sounds like the best thing that could possibly happen. But on the same token, I do like being around people. I like having friends. And so I've, really kind of had to be deliberate about scheduling stuff with friends, just especially as I've gotten older, everybody gets busy. People have their work life, their family life, stuff going on. And if, there's just way less instances of, hey, nothing's going on tonight. You want to come over and hang out? It has to really be more scheduled. And so I've got currently really two groups of friends that every week we just have a standing meetup after work. I kind of have a group of programmer friends that I meet up with every Monday that, we get together and talk about nerdy stuff, and people get to vent about, their employer. A few of us are freelancers, so we kind of get to vent at each other about difficulties we've had with clients. And then I've got another group of friends that are, people I've been hanging out with since college. And we have standing get together every Friday, where it's just, hey, everybody come hang out, bring your kids. We're going to spend a few hours having dinner and some drinks and just hanging out. And, even if we don't get to see each other in any way for the rest of the week, at least we've got that. And so those help a lot. And then, kind of, I do music. So my bandmate Chris comes over pretty much every weekend when we can both swing it. So, just having stuff, kind of standing events on the schedule that I know are going to happen, help me on that social aspect of not kind of completely turning into a hermit.
Yeah. So, I mean, if you're out there, that's a great suggestion. Make it more of a point to have outside of a work context, like social interactions. That also say maybe if you are particularly extroverted, or you think you'd really miss the loneliness of standard office culture, maybe you rely on that to be your social life. There's nothing to say that you can't pitch predominantly towards companies in the area. Or if you're willing to travel, go do on sites. You're going to have control ultimately over how high touch or low touch your engagements are. So I think you can control both angles of that. I would just kind of do an honest evaluation of how and who you are, and maybe factor that in a little bit to how you plan for the freelance work that you're doing. Because the one thing you don't want to do is, be a complete people person and then decide to go off on your own and do something that's almost always going to be inherently lone wolf type work. Look at that about yourself. Or, if you're stuck in that, chart yourself a path to more human interaction, I guess.
Yep. And, I think local meetup groups for whatever your specialty happens to be is a great way to sort of bridge your work life into some more, I guess, personal relationships with people that do the same type of thing that you do. Help. Good way to find your tribe around you, I guess, is what I'm saying. That's,
Yeah, definitely.
that's kind of where my nerd group happy hour has grown out of. It was people that we knew each other from local programming meetups, and it just kind of turned into, hey, yeah, let's get together on Monday after work and have a beer. And then, well, yeah, let's do this every week.
So let's see, what else do you have? I'm trying to think of, generally speaking, like the less glamorous side. I'm trying to imagine, like, those memes of like, what my parents think I do and what other people think I like. I'm trying to imagine what a freelancer looks like to, say, a salaried employee or whomever.
Yeah.
What's like the darker side of it? I mean, I think one is kind of the collection of taxes and in the U.S. health insurance.
Yeah.
Where like somebody looks at the freelancer and says, oh, well, you're making $100 an hour for the kind of work that I get paid 50 an hour for as a salaried employee. Like, you're making way more money than me. And you're your own boss. And I guess maybe the flip side of that is just all of the places that money goes that isn't right into your pocket.
Yeah. And the fact that, it's really hard to bill 40 hours a week to a client. If you're working on your business in any way, it's real hard to actually bill 40 hours. So, you've got time that you're working that you're not getting your, card rate for.
Yeah. So there's that time gap. And then you're paying, depending on how you're structured, at least I can speak for the US, you're paying self-employment tax, like you're paying extra tax. You're paying probably for your own health insurance, unless maybe your spouse is on a corporate health insurance plan. But then you're paying kind of these things, like you can prepare for both of those because the self-employment tax is going to be a marginal, I want to say 6.5% or 7.5%, whatever that may be. You can prepare for that, and you can sort of bake in, I'm going to be taking care of my own health insurance. I'm going to be taking care of these things so I can sort of set what I need to make accordingly. But there are these hidden costs like tax prep, for instance, with one of my businesses that was structured as an S corporation. You can get like surprises where, I'm going to have to pay $750 or $1,000 for tax prep. Oh no, it turns out this year it's $2,000 because reasons. And, that's just kind of the cost of doing business. So I guess all in, if you're in an employed context, there's a lot of stuff. It's kind of like bowling in a bowling alley with bumpers in the gutters. There's a lot of things going on that maybe you don't appreciate that just kind of keep you heading down in the right direction. And I guess with this finance stuff, you can move into that gutter a lot easier once you go off on your own.
Yeah. So another thing that I think is kind of related to the pipeline management that you brought up at the very first, if you're not careful about it, it's easy to get yourself overbooked, or it can be easy to get yourself overbooked. Especially if you've got somebody that, is a prospect and they're like, okay, yeah, this looks great. Let's start next week. And this will be a 3-week project. And then you talk to somebody else and say, okay, I've got availability in 4 weeks, let's start then. And then that first client, for whatever, needs to delay for a couple of weeks. You could find yourself either overlapping projects or 2 of them where people are hoping that you can start at the same time. And if you don't handle that well, it's easy to end up where you're, basically have to do 2 projects in one week, in the same amount of time. And that can lead to working late at night, working on the weekend. And that can lead to burnout. And sort of relatedly, even if you don't find yourself overbooked, just the freedom of your environment and not having, a workplace that you go into and having, the clock in and clock out rituals to kind of mark the beginning and the end of your day. It's real easy to let your workday kind of bleed into all of the time. It's easy to take a break for dinner and then, oh, well, I'll just check my email. And then next thing you know, you've been working for 2 hours. It's easy to let weekends get away from you, and you end up, either needing to work on the weekend because you didn't work enough during the week because you knew that you had the time available to you, or there's just a number of reasons. Time management, I guess, is what I'm saying. Is it can get down to being tough to set boundaries for yourself, and that's something that I think is worth doing and being deliberate about.
Yeah, if I think about, like, I guess the most natural comparison with a lot of this stuff is just to the employed world. If you're an employee, there's sort of a couple of natural pressures that converge to make your time spent at the job relatively predictable. If you're a salaried employee and you spend, say, less than 40 hours a week there, people are going to start to give you dirty looks and you're going to have problems. If you're spending way more than that there, typically there's not a lot of personal motivation to do that. I mean, maybe you want to better yourself or you think you're getting ahead, but by and large, that relationship is one where ideally for you, you could work your 40 per week and no more because you're going to collect the same paycheck. So those two forces, I guess, kind of converge you to sort of a predictable standard work week. But when you're freelancing, you could, on the one hand, just say, well, I think I'm okay on money, and really get into a situation where you're not being at all disciplined and you're just procrastinating and not getting anything done. And there's nothing really to stop you from that other than running out of money and not being able to pay your bills. And then on the flip side, there's much less to exert natural downward pressure on the time you spend, because if you're hustling, those nights and weekends of reaching out to additional prospects are probably going to mean more business. So there's this ongoing knowledge that the more you do, the more money you can make, the better off you'll be in the long run. So it gets a lot harder to converge on an amount of time that makes sense. And my experience has been one of sometimes oscillating between ridiculous work schedules, 80, 90-hour weeks, and then sometimes like burnout and, I need a break or I completely unplug, as opposed to saying like, all right, I'm going to really stick to a disciplined schedule. So I think, on that subject of time management, that is a really big challenge, I think, for a lot of people who are working for themselves. And frankly, that's like personally probably been my biggest pain point over the years.
Yeah, it's been one that I've struggled with for sure. Just, like I say, it's kind of easy for me to let myself get into overworking, especially, if I'm enjoying the projects that I'm working on and they're challenging and, I'm feeling like I'm making good progress on them. Sometimes it's kind of hard to want to put the keyboard down at the end of the day. But I've found that it's important to force myself to do so.
Yeah, I mean, I guess that, that's the flip side of the independence and stuff, like, because there's a, glamorous part of that too, which is like the way I work and doing what I do. I can go grocery shopping at, 10:30 a.m. on Tuesday morning if I want. So that's nice, but it does come with this sort of never-ending series of like cognitive trade-offs that you're making. Like, well, at any given point, I could be working. So it's almost like I have to justify to myself that I'm not. Which sounds strange, but, even on the weekends, it's like, well, I could do just no, shouldn't work the weekends. That's not sustainable.
Yeah.
So I guess here's another one, kind of, it's sort of a brief aside, but like I had talked a little bit about like all the extra money you might think you're going to be making, that, a good portion of that actually evaporates into cost. There's also the joy of staying on top of when and how your clients are paying you, which you can't necessarily take for granted. So like, I think a pain point that sooner or later any freelancer is going to experience is when that big client that owes you a lot of money is 3 months behind in paying you. And that starts to mean like, say, going into your savings.
Yeah. Keeping up with getting paid is very, very important, and definitely not one of the first things that you think about when you think, oh, I think you should be a freelancer. That'll be fun. You're part of saying, hey, I'm going to become a freelancer is also saying, hey, I'm going to become a collections department. And yeah, it's important to do it.
Yeah, I remember somebody reaching out to me. Like, I got a lot of questions through my Dead Tech blog from readers. And somebody had said something that, like, no offense to the person, they were new to being a freelancer, and it just made me chuckle. It was something like, I sent an invoice saying due upon receipt, and that was 2 weeks ago, and I haven't received payment. I forget what the exact question was, but it was, as if to say, like, this is just a completely unacceptable situation. And like, what would anyone do in this position? I remember thinking, oh my goodness, you have a lot to learn. The clients, especially at the enterprise, will basically ignore whatever payment terms you put on there, and they will pay you whenever their accounts payable department decides to. So you kind of learn to live with that. I mean, there are ways to mitigate it. I think we've talked about it plenty on the show, but that is, something that you're, whether, I mean, as a freelancer, or if you grow like an agency or, a business that's B2B, like that's a problem for anyone. Anything that's B2B is collecting payments from customers and clients. So that is something you will have to get used to. And it's something that's really not a lot of fun.
Yeah, no. But I can say for sure that getting paid up front makes a lot of the headache and heartache and trouble of that kind of stuff go away. It certainly just completely eliminates the risk that you've done a lot of work and somebody's not going to pay you. And that's, it's hard to measure hard to measure what that's worth just on your kind of mental stress reduction.
And I've found too that even if it's just a deposit, I think that might tend to filter out some of the worst paying clients. Cause like if they can get it together in time to pay you 25 or 50% of the balance of the project up front, at least they're proving to you that they have an accounts payable group that isn't a complete mess, and they're able to do that. And if they're doing that they're not doing anything shady or what have you. So I think that is a definite mitigating factor. I'm trying to think of like pains, that might be related to newbie freelancers. Like for instance, I've gotten a lot of questions over the course of time about, I think like related to some of the different like brokerage sites that we've talked about, whether it's like Upwork or TopTool or whatever those sites are. I don't personally know a lot about them, but it seems like one of the pains from people who are new to freelancing that they write to me asking questions about is, I'm putting an awful lot of effort into this site and I'm optimizing and I'm just not really getting that much back out of it. So I think if you're either, looking to moonlight and working full time or looking to make the freelance jump, one of the first pains that you might expect is that these sites aren't just magical places where you fill out a few forms and a profile and business comes to you. That you do have to kind of go out in the beginning chasing business. And I think a lot of people might not quite expect that.
Yeah, just the part of, being a freelancer is a lot of running a business in addition to using whatever skill it is that you are selling. And if you want to only use your skill and aren't at all interested in the process of running a business, freelancing might not be for you.
Yeah, agreed. That's a good point, frankly. Like, the caveat I was saying at the beginning, which is, I would wholeheartedly endorse going freelance because, on balance, the good is definitely, for me, outweighing any bad that comes along with it. But if you really just want to, write code or do user experience or whatever it is you do, and, all of this other stuff we're talking about is an anathema, then, it might be so unpleasant. It might be so much pain that it's not worth it for you. You're going to have to go chase business, and it's going to be kind of weird at first, like, because you'll initially be in the process of probably trying to look for freelance work the way that you might have as a salaried employee, where, hey, I'm a programmer and I'm looking for programming work. So you're going to be looking for work while kind of trying to figure out how to position yourself and build a book of business and all that at once. And that can be sort of overwhelming. So I think you would at least need to be receptive to ideas like figuring out how to pitch, figuring out how to position yourself, managing your pipeline, definitely.
Yeah. So kind of related to that, one thing that I think isn't real obvious is that you should be looking at, especially if you have clients over a long period of time, you should constantly be evaluating, is this client still a good fit for me? And should I keep them around? And there are, a lot of reasons why somebody that you worked with in the early days might not still be a good fit. Some of the most common are that you've either changed your offering and are now offering higher value services to other clients, or just that you are not getting paid the same with your longtime client as you could with going to recruit new work. And keeping low-paying clients around, even if they're good clients, necessarily prevents you from being able to get new work at higher rates. And so it's important to kind of be keeping in mind when and if you should fire existing clients. That's
a great point. And I think maybe there's that triggered in my mind this sort of subtle pain, which is we've talked about a few kind of pains that you'll experience as a newbie freelancer, but maybe you get out there and you're established and you have your book of business and it's going reasonably well. You're earning a living, but you can suddenly, in boiled frog sense, find yourself kind of miserable. And I think that's what happens when you're not performing this like client curation, that you can get sort of locked into a pattern where the work isn't the best fit for you, but you have enough of it and you're dependent enough on those clients that it's consuming most of your time, and you're sort of in this vicious cycle of feeling burned from this ill-fitting work. So you're not out trying to find better work. I'm trying to think. There was another book, like I had talked about the E-Myth Revisited, and there was something like The Pumpkin Entrepreneur. I'll have to Google it as an aside and maybe offer it as a pick. But like where the book is basically focused on being in a constant state of like applying the 80-20 rule to your clients and then making a plan to identify the best 20% and then find more of those while making yourself a little uncomfortable by firing, up to the bottom 80% of them. And while that's pretty aggressive, I think he's targeting more like agencies and smaller businesses, but it's worth bearing in mind that you can get into this actually kind of unpleasant equilibrium of success where the work isn't great. There's maybe too much of it. It's burned you a little bit. But if you're only doing it with like 3 repeating or simultaneous clients, they might be taking too much of your time for you to really feel like going to find anything else, and you get kind of stuck. I think that's something that happens to a lot of freelancers and business owners at times.
Yeah.
I am trying to think of like, a mix of things that like people have reported to me and that I have personally felt. Here's like a personal one of mine, which is I'm actually a fairly like risk averse person. And one of the hardest things over the years for me to get used to has been the potential for, I guess, ebbs and flows in business, and that it's hard to project your income, and it's hard to project your business expenses. And so like I came from a lot of years of salaried employment, and personal budgeting is really easy. You take home X thousands of dollars a month, and then basically budgeting just means like you pick some number below that so that you have savings, and then you don't spend more than that number, and that's it. But when you freelance, projecting out your future income can be pretty difficult. And then even if you do a pretty good job, say you've got a couple years in and you just use your, past like aggregate average over the last 2 years and say, well, on average, I make this amount per month. Well, you might have a big spike and a big valley. So now you get hit with the unexpected, even when you are projecting out. That one big client that you have tells you thanks, but no thanks. And suddenly your personal finances, if you are using your income from the freelancing to project those, get thrown all out of whack. That was one of the hardest things for me to adjust to.
Yeah, that can certainly be challenging. One thing that has worked well for me to address that is, so you should probably do this regardless. You should have a business checking account or bank account that is separate from your personal account. But I structured things such that over a period of time, I built up enough savings in my business account that I just keep in there about 6 months of total expenses. And that includes, all the outside expenses that I have to pay, as well as paying myself a salary. And then, every month I do just like like clockwork, just like it's normal payroll, pay myself out of the company into my personal account, that then, that personal account is on a really fairly steady, stream at this point, because I've just got money stashed away in the business that I know I can pay myself for up to 6 months if all of my work dried up tomorrow. And so that makes the personal stuff more stable and more predictable, and sort of localizes the unpredictability only in the business account itself. And then, like I said, I've built up some reserves such that I'm not just always, checking the checking balance every morning to make sure that I'm going to be able to eat.
Yeah, I mean, that was a big help for me too. Building up personal savings. I'm trying to think. I've had different structures with the business. For a lot of years, I just had I had separate accounts for the business, but I would basically pull out everything that was profit, which was almost everything when I was a consultant, and then just manage that on the personal finance side where I did have runway. One thing that's been nice for me is our business Hit Subscribe has now grown to the part where we have employees and run regular payrolls, which includes a paycheck. So that business has kind of grown large enough to be stable in a way that I can count on. But, for a long time, that was interesting. So for you out there listening, if you have a way, to really, I don't know, if your business is maybe bringing you $10,000 a month, I'm saying this in retrospect, that I might say, look, I'm going to pay myself only like $3,000 a month until we get a lot of money pooled into the business. And then I'll gradually ratchet up that salary I'm taking out. But yeah, I want to get enough money in there that whatever salary, and however you take it out as a draw or whatever. But whatever I'm pulling out of the business, I'm going to keep it small until I can really justify building it up by having savings and steady income. That would be probably a way I would do it differently.
Yeah. And, having that savings sort of, to me, has had compounding effects where it helps my stress level in general, and also helps me maintain perspective that it's okay to turn down bad work, and leaves me less with the feeling that, oh God, I've got to get every lead that ever comes across my plate, I have to land it. It helps me be able to focus on the higher value work and kind of turn away stuff that's not going to be a good fit or that isn't going to bring the rates that I want to charge.
Philosophically, I think a lot of the pain points that I hear about in having a business, a practice, kind of comes from the need to take business, a feeling of a bit of desperation, versus a lot of pain points get alleviated in general from being able to be pretty picky about your business. So, I mean, from everything, obviously, to pipeline management, if you have more business than you can handle, that's not really a problem for you. But to just day-to-day quality of your work, if you have more business than you can handle, you're presumably turning away the worst fits, the bad paying clients, et cetera. Just kind of across the board, putting yourself in a position to be picky is a huge help. So they're, building that runway before you go off on your own, being frugal about your expenses, getting established. I think there are a lot of things you can do to stack the deck in your favor that way. Well, what do you think? Any other dark sides of freelancing that you can think of? I'm kind of trying to rack my brain for things that are a little more existential and less tactical.
I mean, just sort of as a large category, there are such things as bad clients, and you want to be looking out for those. You want to try to identify red flags that are going to identify these people. For me, one of the big ones is they are overly concerned about, a rate of, what are we going to pay you per week, and can't ever get to understanding what's the value of this work for your project. And, that often just sort of manifests itself as a preoccupation with getting the lowest rate and trying to bargain me down and trying to negotiate and, structure the deal weird so that they get the rate that they're looking for or whatever. And I've sort of found that behavior seems to often come along with other bad behaviors that I don't want to be dealing with, like micromanagement and, sort of what I call the fire of the day project management approach, where, the priorities are constantly shifting just based on whatever somebody's decided they want to care about that day. And so, I think just the fact that there are such things as bad clients isn't always immediately obvious when you're first getting started.
Agreed. Like for me, the heuristic one that I've learned with considerable battle scars over the years, if you have any ability to be discerning about your clients at all, this is the heuristic I would offer you. If the bottom range of what you're willing to do the work for from a price perspective is at the top of the client's range or slightly apart, that is a recipe for disaster. So just to restate that, if you're going to do a piece of work and you think I would do this work anywhere from $5,000 to $10,000, and the client comes to you and says, "Oh, we really had a budget in mind of $4,000," run away from that seriously fast, because what's happening there, and think about it, if you engage, like let's say the logical thing to do there would be for you both to say like, well, okay, let's do it for $4,500. Now you're starting on a project where subconsciously you're thinking, this isn't worth my time. It's below the minimum I wanted to do this for. Meanwhile, the client is thinking, this is more than the upper end of my budget. This person better do a great job. You already resent each other basically from day one. And it's because you're really misaligned on the value of the work that you're doing. So I've learned this over and over again. If you start out apart that way, yikes, that rarely ends well. So what I would advise doing, if you're able to do this, I mean, if you need the work, you need the work. But if you can do this at all, is just say, look, it looks like this is probably not a fit. You might go here or there to find people more price range. Let me know if things change on your end. Because, one of the biggest pain points I've experienced is on the other side of that, where you do take that work and then it's just, that's a demanding client that always thinks you need to be doing more. And you're wanting to throw up your hands in frustration and say like, look, this is borderline charity from my perspective. So please stay away from that. Do as I say, not as I did.
Yeah.
Anything else?
Nothing else coming immediately to mind.
I think like philosophically, I'd like to close by restating that, all of these are good things to surface for you to bear in mind. But like, honestly, like having your own business is pretty great.
Yeah.
I would say take these pain points and understand that they're going to happen. Manage your expectations and have a plan with them, but don't let them put you off or discourage you in any way, because not only can you get past them, but there's, a whole community of people with Jeremy and I as evidence among others that deal with these things and can help you through them. So in the end, it's a pretty good deal. And I think it's a great deal for a lot of people to freelance.
Yep. Wholeheartedly agree. Well, let's move on to picks. What do you got for us this week, Eric?
Well, I'm going to go with the two books that I mentioned during the course of the discussion. One is called The E-Myth Revisited, and it is about building and systemizing a business. And it's a pretty interesting listen, especially kind of at the beginning, talking about this idea that simply wanting to not be employed doesn't make you an entrepreneur. The author, whose name escapes me, but he defines these, I think, three personas. It's like the entrepreneur, the manager, and I forget the other one, but he talks about like kind of the interplay and how you have to operate as all of these as a business owner or freelancer, and how to kind of manage this. I think the technician is the other one. And in this line of work, in the technical, we tend to be technicians. We have these entrepreneurial spasms, but then we just want to go off on our own and not have to deal with the manager type. People bossing us around, but we really just want to be the technician. So the first half of the book too is like super valuable in helping you set expectations and saying, look, you can't go off on your own and just be a technician. You have to do these other things. So I would give that a read or a listen on audiobook. And then the other one I'm pretty sure was called The Pumpkin Entrepreneur. I'll get it right in the actual pick links. But this was the one that was talking all about how to identify and call out bad clients while finding more better clients. And I think that for a lot of people with a freelancing practice, it could be very revelatory, where you might realize that you actually have more bad clients than you think, and you need them less than you think you do. And that's it for me.
Cool. I am going to pick the Independent Consulting Manual, which is a book that I was a contributor to that I think has a lot of really good advice for people that are kind of new to freelancing. Covers a lot of topics, kind of help you figure out how to structure your business, how to structure your personal schedule, all that kind of stuff. And then also an email course that I offer that you could find at increaseyourconsultingfees.com. And this is a short course about doing things to make the value that you provide to your clients more obvious so that they can see it and realize how valuable that you are to them. And I think that's it. So thanks everybody for joining us on this, the 339th episode of the Freelancer Show, and we will see you next time.
Bandwidth for this segment is provided by CacheFly, the world's fastest CDN. Deliver your content fast with CacheFly.